you got to own like who you really are and not be apologizing for it and not be trying to rewrite it or be something different. Give more than you get for a good long while, right? Like offer stuff and let people get to know you. Before you launch anything, go get input. Show it to 20 people. Beta test it.
I'm Coach Des, mindset motivator and lifestyle entrepreneur. My mission is to help you crush your self-limiting beliefs and embrace being unapologetically you. The Born Unbreakable podcast brings you inspirational stories from all over the world that will empower you to unlock your unbreakable spirit. I'd love to partner with you on your next breakthrough. Go to bornunbreakable.com to schedule a free transformational call. Action begins today. Welcome to the Born Unbreakable podcast. It's November. It's unbelievable. I can't believe we made it here because it means holidays and also less than 60 days left in the year, something thereabouts. So I think it's a very reflective time and it's such a timely topic. Today we're talking about branding. It's something I've talked about on my show before, but I would really like to talk about it today in a different light. And there is no better person to talk about it with than my guest, Susan Hamilton Meier, who happens to be an expert in this topic. So we're going to have a really great discussion, but Susan is many things besides being a branding expert. What I love specifically is her mission to empower women. And because that's what I care about too. So there's alignment. That's a branding connection that we have, but she really helps women untangle the zigzags of their career to find a clear, shiny thread of their story and design the next steps of their professional journey, which, as we know, for anyone who's listening, it's not a straight line. In my firm, and we actually both have consulting in our background, we say it's more of a rock wall. It's more of a rock wall where you have to climb through different sections to get to where you want to go. It's really not just a ladder. And that's such a stereotypical way to describe things. If you ever went through any sort of professional development journey, it would always be the career ladder, and assuming that it is always an upward move. There's so many other types of moves like lateral or just changing interest, not necessarily changing, positions to attain more power, but just to attain more creativity, for example. She happens to have also gone to Harvard Business School. Not a bad place to learn a couple of things or two. So, I'm sure your brain has been picked because of the elite, that you've happened to have the pleasure to learn around and be around. But I'm just grateful for you coming on the show and just spending some time having a really authentic conversation with me today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I think this is going to be fun.
I think so too. Tell us where you're calling in from today.
Yeah, I'm in New York City. I'm in Manhattan, up in the Columbia University area.
Beautiful. I love New York. So we're representing both coasts today. We've got the East Coast and the West Coast meeting to make some magic. But as I was talking to Susan, before we started recording, one of the most powerful things that we both agree to in branding is your story. So can you talk a little bit about your personal story, Susan?
Oh, sure. So I am a visual artist, and that's what I studied when I went to college. And the last thing in the world I thought I would end up doing is working in business. I did like internships in museums and at Sotheby's, and I was thinking about maybe working in a gallery or, if I had the courage, maybe even being an artist. And I was given this job opportunity. I graduated college during a big recession, and I had the opportunity to take a job in management consulting, which seemed like a wildly exotic thing to me, having never studied economics, having never opened a spreadsheet, knowing nothing about business. But it was presented to us in, I think the analogy they used was, do you like to solve puzzles, right? Do you like to kind of play with complex problems and figure out what the solutions might be? And I thought, yeah, that is my brain work, the way my brain works. And to this day, I really do enjoy those strategic questions that, oh, that's interesting. Like, what if we did it this way? What might be a better way to distribute those energy bars? Or, you know what I mean? Like all these things that aren't explicitly creative, but they're creative thinking. So that drew me into consulting. They really gave me an education because they had to, because I didn't know what I was doing. But what I discovered working there, I was not the queen of the spreadsheets, but what I did a lot of was interviewing people. And I worked in the consumer practice, and I started to do a lot of interviewing on behalf of consumer goods companies. What they do, customer research or consumer insights is what they call it. And I found that super interesting, how emotionally attached people were to the brands that they used, that they wore, that they ate. And I just wanted to go deeper. I had no idea at that time that there was such a thing as branding, that there were agencies that did branding. Of course, we all know there are advertising agencies, but there's this whole industry in between, kind of, what your strategy is, and somebody's going to go put it on, on a billboard or, the virtual equivalent. But there's this discipline in between, which is really about storytelling. Funny enough, you asked me to start by sharing my story, which is really what branding is about. So kind of the meta answer to your question. I got really interested in the branding piece, the storytelling piece. I lived in New York City. I lived in Boston first. I went with the Boston Consulting Group, which was my employer at the time. They sent me to Asia. So I lived in Singapore, I lived in Hong Kong. That was exciting. I was thinking about what to do next. So it was a 2-year program at the time. I'm telling you the details because we're talking about the zigzag path. So I don't normally go into this much depth, and I'll keep it quick. But there were so many zigzags, right? So Boston and then Asia. And then I was like, maybe I want to do the backpacker thing because I'm, 23. Let's check that out. So I did that for a while. Then I had a planning to come back to the US. I got a job offer in Singapore to run a theater. Wow, that's exciting. I was a theater kid in high school. I kind of was thinking about doing nonprofit art stuff. So I helped build this theater in Singapore, which is called the Singapore Repertory Theater. It's a huge theater now. It's amazing. But that was a long time ago. And it was just a small theater that was looking to, establish this kind of international presence. So that was exciting. Then I decided to go to business school. That's when I came back to Boston. I went to Harvard, and I spent a couple more years at BCG because they actually helped me out with business school, which was great. And that's when I came to New York. And that was around the time when the internet was starting to take off and big brands really still didn't have a handle on what their brand meant in an online environment. And this kind of move from who are we in a bricks and mortar world, and what does that mean, who we are in a virtual world? And that was a fascinating time to be part of, consumer goods and retail world. And I kept doing a lot more of that, interviewing people. We did focus groups. We did in-home interviews. We did shop-alongs. We did one-on-ones. We watched people navigate, the web, as we called it at the time, of how are you going to make purchase? Are you buying books online? What does that look like? I went into women's homes and looked in their lingerie drawers because I was working for a big retailer, lingerie retailer. Fascinating. So when I finished there in that kind of, it was again like a 2-year role that I had signed on for. I had the opportunity to go work in a branding agency, but I also was feeling the pull of, wait a second, I'm a visual artist. Is this really the direction that I want to go with my career, like horses and gangbusters? Or do I want to get back to my center and find myself really who I am? So I said, okay, I'm going to take kind of a self-imposed sabbatical. I'm going to do a little freelancing which is kind of a weird thing to do when you're in your late 20s. I mean, it's not normally the time when people are like, let me take some time to ponder. But I just couldn't, I don't know. I've always had to kind of follow that voice inside of me that's like, I'm not sure that what I'm doing here is like fully and entirely me. It's a part of me, but I'm also missing something. I'm missing that visual piece, that visual creativity. So again, the universe conspires to help you. It just so happened that a friend had a studio that he was looking to share. So that was a whole period of time. That was when Dumbo was fresh and new and not crowded with shops, but crowded with artists. We had an amazing time, an amazing space. We did open studios. We held dance parties. I made a lot of art. I learned a lot of stuff. And I freelanced as a brand consultant. So I was kind of doing these two things at the same time. And I also did all sorts of other stuff. Like I was helping out a friend who was an interior designer, and I was making art for her, and I was doing the windows at Bergdorf's, and I was just like tasting a little bit of everything. It was really, really fun. And then I decided that I wanted to start a family, and all of that, like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, felt a little bit not grounded enough, like if I was going to be a parent. So I thought, okay, this logic turned out not to be the best logic, but my logic was I should get a kind of a one job situation going on if I'm going to be, a family person now. Mm-hmm. So 6 months pregnant, I went and got a job in a branding agency, and they were like, I mean, bless them, to their credit. They were like, that's great. We welcome you aboard. Fully suspecting that I might be getting in over my head, right? And I'm suddenly going to have this new baby. And as it turned out, it worked for a little while until it didn't work. I didn't actually have to do that much traveling in that role. I ended up switching to another agency, not because of any problem I was having, but how these things go, you get recruited by somebody else. So I worked for 2 different agencies while I had my first child and then a second child. And then with the second, I realized it's just too much, right? I'm in a client service business. My team also needs me to be there. I can't be like, oh, my kid has an ear infection, I gotta go. And, people were not nearly as comfortable then. Even though we had the technology, people were not as comfortable then with like, oh, I'll just hop on a Zoom call and we can do the call remote while my kid is crying in the background. Like people didn't do that. And I think that's a huge evolution that's going to help in so many dimensions that people are more comfortable with that now. But anyway, at the time I thought, I think my option here is, and I've been thinking about it for a while anyway, I think my option here is to kind of hang out my own shingle and try to do this on my own. And worst case scenario, I freelance for a couple of years until my kids get older and I go back and get another job. Best case scenario, which is what it turned out to be, is that I love being an entrepreneur. It was not, I don't want to say it wasn't difficult. It's always difficult and challenging to get a business off the ground and get clients, but it wasn't as stressful at all as I thought that was going to be. I actually enjoy doing that. I don't feel like I'm selling because I'm talking about stuff that I genuinely enjoy doing. And anyway, 12 years later, here I am. I've been running this business now for 12 years. And for the first, 8 years of that, it was all the stuff that I had been doing before in agency world, big corporate brands, ranging all the way up to Fortune 100 companies, but also very much as an independent practitioner, my sweet spot was in those companies that are like $30 to $50 million revenue, thinking about almost ready to go public, and they really want to like clean up their branding so that they look profesh, right? And so I worked with a lot of those companies. A lot of them turned out to be in technology and healthcare. Started doing a lot of work in healthcare just because I found it really interesting. It wasn't something I had a background in at all before. And yeah, so that was just an amazing kind of multiple pivots that I just explained to you. And then about 4 years ago, and I have to say it was probably a trickle before that, of people coming to me like, I'm not really, I can't pay you what you get paid by corporate corporate clients, but can you just help me? Like, I need to write my deck for this business I'm starting, or I'm looking for a job. Can you help me write my bio? Because that's kind of what you do for, like, you write the copy on the back of the cereal box, right? Like, what's my cereal box copy? So I was doing a little bit of that, either pro bono or, for a tiny fee. And then I started like feeling, and there was coincided with the pandemic as well. Like, so we all had this weird shift, and, I'm not sure I would say I had more time on my hands, but my time was different.
Yeah.
And during that time, I thought, I'm going to start writing down all the exercises that I do with my corporate clients to help them with brand positioning, to help them with innovation. Because I had this whole kind of bag of tricks that I would use. Like, there were collaging exercises, there were fill in the blank word searches, there were, different kind of ways of activating people's creativity to look at things differently. And I was like, what if I could just put all those exercises down? It'll be a good exercise anyway to do that, even if I never turn it into a new business. But as it turned out, I turned it into a new business. I created this workbook that's specifically geared for individuals who are either searching for what to do next and trying to kind of get their brand kind of shiny and tidy and figure out how to tell their story, which might not be the easiest story to tell. I gave you my long, ugly, dirty version of my story today because of what we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't tell that whole thing to a new person. You need to tell your story in 10 seconds.
Right, it's the elevator pitch
version for another time, right? But it kind of has to make sense together, but be a little interesting. It's an art form, and it is exactly what large commercial brands do when they explain to you why you should buy their Cheerios instead of somebody else's, right? Like, it's exactly the same. So, and what I found in doing that work, so then I started kind of more formally coaching and kind of working people through the tools that I had developed. And I love it so much. I mean, because you work in this space, to be doing that work that's so aligned with your heart and your mission of, lifting up women. I see, and I do have some male clients, but the majority who've come to me are women. And a lot of it does, the data supports that it is largely women who do things like take time off to do elder care or child care. Like, we are more so the zigzaggers of the workforce than men for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. And so the people who are finding me because my message is about, like, hey, going back and forth makes your storytelling harder, but it actually makes you more interesting, more innovative. You've got a bigger skill set. You've got a bigger network. This is a feature, not a bug. So start there. Stop beating yourself up for taking the zigzag path. You have done amazing things. And now let's sit down and make a big collage of what those are and find the thread, find the through line, find the way that you're going to tell your story that turns people on and draws the people to you that you want in your tribe.
Oh my, it's you are brilliant, Susan, because I think you're hitting on something that everybody can relate to, which is we're not one-trick ponies. We're dynamic human beings. We have different ideas. I think the challenge is the difference between chasing every shiny object and figuring out how to hone the couple of things that you have a passion behind, because I see that all the time.
Yes.
There's kind of primary that sustain people, where this is the thing that pays the bills that you enjoy doing. But by the way, you're also a yoga enthusiast, or you happen to be a junior chef that probably could be on, the next Top Chef show or something like that. And so there's a lot, I think, of layers to a person. And I think the essence of branding is being able to bring out those best pieces. But you said something that's so thought-provoking, which is, what is that common thread? What is that through line? And I think that's the difference between, or that's that point where people get stuck, because they know that they have all these dynamic elements to themselves, but they're not quite sure how to put that all together. And that's where somebody like you with such a diverse background in branding can help them just get a little bit past that hurdle,
And what's
which is
cool about the way that you find your through line is also the way that you prevent yourself from chasing the shiny object. Because the shiny object tends to be either about what's trending, right? What's hot, what other people are doing, or about money. And, so many of us have, most of us have like a very real revenue imperative, right, in our lives. So that's not nothing. Many of us also have kind of just like a whole set of fears around money that make it difficult for us to like really see clearly what it is that we want to be doing, where we can also make money. Not, that I'm going to go starve for my art, but finding, so the process of self-reflection is really what it's about, of putting all of that fear and how am I going to get there and what's going to happen aside. And so I always start with like the who am I portion of the programming, which will help you tell your story, because when you start to understand what your core values are, when you start to understand what your passions are, what your superpowers are, what your strength is, then you go, oh, I see why I made that choice. I see why I quit that job that paid me a lot of money and went off and did this other thing that everybody thought didn't make sense.
they thought I was a crazy person.
Other thing, if you live long enough, you realize that other thing comes back later, 15 years later, and you're so glad you did it because it gave you the credentials to do this other thing, which is hugely revenue generating. So some of it is a little bit of time and patience, but the seeing who you truly are and what you truly care about starts to unlock both. And I talk about owning your story as well as writing your story. So before you can write your story, like, hey, how do I position myself for other people to see me and like me? You got to own like who you really are and not be apologizing for it and not be trying to rewrite it or be something different. Like you are who you are. To a certain extent, you're born who you are.
Right. That's so crazy. But when we started talking, I told you my story, which I actually haven't fully told. That's why I'm writing a book about it. Is like the being unapologetically you, which is my message, is, I struggled with that. That's why I needed to make it my message, because it wasn't, I always felt like I had to live up to the other stories, and find those similarities, because then I could fit in and I could be accepted because those people were accepted. And I think that recognizing your uniqueness and what makes you who you are is incomparable. That's what makes your brand unique, is because you're not trying to be like everyone else. But so I did have this question for you, because I do think it's, in this day and age, we're sitting here in this interview, November 2022, and there's a lot that has happened over the last couple of months, years. The pandemic isn't obvious. We're kind of on the other side of that, managing a hybrid world where we're virtual, in person. We could do both. We understand that now. But we're also in the age of the influencer, which is these people that come out and they just have this massive following of millions of people, and you're not even quite sure exactly what they're influencing, but they're called an influencer. Like, that's a thing that people want to sign up to do. There's young people today in their schools that are going consultant, doctor, lawyer, influencer. Like, that seems like a faster path if I get on YouTube, TikTok, or something. How do you cut through the noise of what is out there today that keeps you practical in finding your way to get out there in the world amongst all the influencers and things that are on the internet now?
Yeah, I think it's about kind of where you start, right? If you start out going, I want to be an influencer, but you don't have an answer to the question like, well, what are you passionate about? It's going to be really hard to build that, right? I mean, it's fine to start out saying, there's a million famous people who grew up saying, I want to be famous. That's fine to want to be an influencer, but you got to have some content, right? Like, what's your point of view? What's your passion? What's your thing? The people who become influencers have something that they just can't get enough of. And they do not get bored going out there over and over again, because that world of influencers, it's 24/7. It's every day. So you have to be really into whatever it is that you're doing. And then I would say on the flip side, if you're genuinely that into something, you're going to find your audience. I think that, if I look at it, come at it from the other way, from like building a corporate brand, they all want to be influencers. That's the whole game, right? Like if you're Coca-Cola, you want to be a cultural influence. Like that's what they're trying to do. They're selling soda. It's not like a very differentiated product. It's not like a new technology. So what they're trying to do is, create kind of a cultural moment, and I'm not trying to pick out Coca-Cola, like insert any brand, right? That kind of plays in that sort of space. So I think that, what the big brands understand is that you need to come in with a point of view and a real perspective, and then find the people that are your people. And they're not all going to be your people. So you can't just go like, I want everyone to love me. You have to let them understand who you are. And then the people who connect with you will love you. So it's, what's your genuine, like, can't get enough super passion, superpower thing you're going to create your world on, your influencer brand, if that's what you want to do. And then how are you going to explain that every day in every way so that kind of the tribe gathers, right? The people who really are connecting to that know it's for them and get something out of what you're saying. They're learning something, or they're feeling a certain way, or maybe you're selling them products that they need, but whatever that is, they're getting something out of that relationship, because a brand is actually just a relationship that you're building. The logo and the colors and the content and the thing, that's just an expression of that. But what you're looking for, I think then the world of influencers is a perfect example of that, right? We're looking for people to follow us. We're looking for friends. We want people to, it's called different stuff on different platforms, but we want people to friend us. We want friends. We're looking for relationships. That's what building your brand is.
Yeah. No, you're 100% right. And I'm thinking about, when you said big companies, there's a bunch of names that are flying through my head because they are mainstays. You think about Nike and Just Do It, or you think about Coca-Cola, or you think about McDonald's. I mean, companies that are timeless. You've seen that arch everywhere, different countries, doesn't matter where you go. The shoes people are wearing, walking on their feet, and there's a simplicity and there's a very clear message. And so it started making me think about, how do you retain your authenticity? Because that's kind of how I think about these brands that have said such long sustainability, but then also innovate along the way, a decade or plus later.
That's a huge, huge challenge. I mean, I think that you just hit the nail on the head of the biggest challenge for a mature, large, developed brand. Because on the one hand, once you get to that place where you're a Nike, you have so much equity in what you've got. It's very dangerous. I mean, those brands protect the minutia of every element of their brand personality, right? Like, what's the exact Pantone of each M&M is a part of the M&M brand, right? Like every single thing, we don't even think about it. And so for them to make even small incremental moves like a flavor variation or, a new silhouette in fashion is a big, big deal, right? And so they tested and they, quantitatively and qualitatively, and they make very kind of, and this different companies do it differently, right? But like the impulse is to be very conservative because you don't want to erode the equity of your brand. You don't want to walk away from a good thing. However, being very conservative makes it very difficult to be innovative. And so the game is to balance, like, and some companies do it by, we're going to create a whole separate group that does nothing but big blue sky, crazy idea innovation, and we're going to let them run and give them a budget. And every so often, they'll come to us with something good enough to test, and we'll see what to do. But we don't want them constrained by what we know in the rest of the corporation is sacred, right? Like, we don't want to touch this. We want them to forget about all the things that are sacred. And that's a model that seems to work pretty well. But it's a challenge. And, also we'll get into the boring bits of the budgeting, but it's also difficult from a budgeting perspective, because if you're a publicly traded company, you're beholden to your shareholders, and your shareholders are not necessarily as keen to see you take a big hit, a loss.
Like,
when
we're going to take a big leap of faith and go venture off and do this other crazy thing when you have the stability. Like, I think, for anyone listening, that Victoria's Secret. Okay. Like, I thought of that because it's a household name. Right. We know Victoria's Secret models, like when you hear that, and now but they also have things that are bigger sizes. So it's not just the tiny woman, because, we're in a day and age where it's about embracing things. But then they came out with pink, right? Mm-hmm. So pink, it's kind of like having Posh Spice and Sporty Spice, where you've got the sexy, you've got all the sultry stuff, but then you're like, oh, but I want to go to my exercise class. And now I could just a one-stop shop. I could go get some workout pants, but then, I could go be sexy after, right? So there's things like that where there's almost like a preservation of a staple, and then somewhat of a spin-off, where you're keeping the integrity because it's still fashion, but then now there's like another niche that you're kind of catering to that can compete with, other brands that are in that niche.
Yeah, so that's another good example. Brand hierarchy, I think, is what you're talking about, where you can create parallel brands underneath the same umbrella with the same or slightly different or completely different names. Does the public even know that they're part of the same brand? So there's lots of architecture questions you can play with. And that's another tool that large corporations use to allow themselves to be innovative without, while mitigating the risk to their base brand. Mm-hmm. Victoria's Secret is an interesting example from a different perspective as well. I think that you've got this company that was for many years, if not decades, a beacon of innovation and a very successful retail story. And I think that they have struggled to innovate in a world which sort of changed out from under them. And that's another challenge of innovation, is like keeping your eye on the context, because the context changes all the time. And so how do you, if suddenly the world moves left and you're here on the right, and I'm not talking politically, but the world moves in one direction, zigs, and you're over in the zag corner, right? Yes. What do you do? What do you do with a world that is kind of almost antithetical to your existing brand equity? Mm-hmm. That's a challenging question as well.
Yeah. And competition. I mean, that's the thing. We live, we're having this conversation in the United States, and I think it can resonate beyond that, but there's capitalism. There's for every Victoria's Secret, there's a mom and pop pop up that just came up and they're have their own unique story, and so that's going to exist. And I do think like the fashion and beauty industry, that's difficult. Amen and congratulations to people who are going into those spaces that have such a big competition, because there's such a saturation there. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to be successful. I think it just requires that innovation, creativity to break through, because it is hard. Like, so the other day, a friend of mine was doing a party. There's a lot of those kinds of brands where it's more word of mouth, right? You throw a little party and there's credits that go to the person hosting the party. They have kind of an expert come in. And I hadn't done that for a while with fashion, but it's a brand called Cabi, Cabi, and it's a women's fashion. And so I'm like, I'm all about it. I keep telling myself I want to go shopping for some new stuff, and I haven't had time, even online and everything. But this is kind of killing two birds with one stone. Hang out with a friend, do some networking, check out some clothes. And their philosophy was around creating looks. So not just like going and, you buy that jacket and that shirt, and then you end up with all this stuff, and like they kind of match, but maybe not. You're because you just bought them all at different times, because you're just walking around the mall randomly grabbing things you think are cute. Their mission is everything goes together. If you get these pants, you could interchange it with this shirt or jacket. It's still going to look good. So their message is about having timelessness, being able to alternate and go from like day to night with keeping on the same pants, but just changing the jacket or something like that. And it was very intriguing. Needless to say, I probably spent too much beyond what I had intended, and because I got all excited, but it was a different value proposition. It was a different message than I'd seen, and it spoke to me. So I was like, hey, why not? If this is going to do all this, I dig it.
Yeah, they gave you a clear value proposition.
Yeah.
They explained it in a way that resonated with you, and then their products backed it up, because, by the way, some people can create great messaging and then you look at the product and you go, so those are all good things. And I think also the story of these, smaller companies who are coming, from the ground up, that's something that's happening now that couldn't have happened a generation ago, right? Because we have like completely different channels. And, if we think it's competitive now in the beauty space, imagine 30 years ago, there were zero entry points. Now, yes, it's hard work, but you can go build a brand from scratch. And there's also perhaps a different consumer who you're speaking to, who's more interested in a homegrown brand. And maybe they're interested in sustainable packaging or organic materials, or, something interesting like a mix and match proposition that they haven't seen before. And so there's room for entrepreneurs in a way that I think is very exciting.
Yeah, I do think this is a very exciting time. So for anyone listening, my encouragement is that there's an abundance, I think, of resources. Now it really is finding your uniqueness. So one of the questions that I had for you is, what are some of those breakthrough tips? So if there's someone listening and they are on that edge, they've already have a vision, they're not too concerned with, oh, is it going to be the right logo? Because they have the right message. They'll get with a team that figures out all of that minutia. How do they break through to do those couple of things that will give them, start to give them that organic audience, like you said, that target that they're looking for, that they can just build? Because what one thread that I have learned of different experts that I've talked to that I think is really, really good is it's about finding those super fans that will just continue on with you, and so it doesn't take having to start with 1 million people to go, I'm going to buy your stuff, your product, your service, whatever it is. It starts with those people that are with you, that are organic, that, they're going to be with you 10 years from now.
Yeah.
What are those
I
things
think
that
one of the mistakes or misconceptions that's easy to have, because we have this sense that we could all be connected to millions of people. I mean, we are connected potentially to millions of people. The moment we open Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, we forget that, like, well, they're not paying attention unless they actually somehow know who you are, right? And so at the end of the day, we're still making friends one at a time, right? We're still building the brand one relationship at a time. And so I think that's like one of the tips that I give is go make friends, whether that's literally you have a trunk show and you're shaking hands with people and like getting to know people face to face, or go into your social media, activities, whatever they may be, with that in mind. So less performative and more interactive, right? You're getting to know people, and it also takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to be tap dancing. Just go be yourself and like go make friends and be generous and understand that you're not going to probably be profitable in the first, depending on what your business is, right? But like give more than you get for a good long while, right? Like offer stuff. Yes. And let people get to know you.
Yeah,
you're not just like selling from the beginning.
Your point about one-on-one interaction, I think is spot on. The likelihood of your ability to be more genuine and also less nervous, because it's not like speaking in front of 100 people that you don't know, trying to go, hey, do you want to buy my stuff? Like, is necessarily the most, non-threatening, fearful kind of situation. Having a one-on-one is just easier to do. Like one of the things that I've found, as a podcaster, and really getting excited about the opportunity for different kinds of people to share their knowledge on the show, is that whole notion of sliding into the DM. I can't even tell you how that, okay? Like if there's just somebody, and I appreciate, one of the things that I do, and I don't just go and like follow somebody, comment and like their stuff, because that's like what everybody's doing. I'll send them a voice note.
Oh, nice.
It's only a minute. It cuts you off. So you have to be very efficient. It's not like you're sending somebody a 20-minute, whole thing that is going to they're not going to pay attention to. You can take 60 seconds or less and say something very meaningful, and it's fine. My whole thing is, even if somebody totally didn't pay attention and moved on, if you did that 10 times, that's 10 minutes. And even if there were 2 people that responded, that's a 20% return rate. That only took 10 minutes, because you only have those 60 seconds every time to make a quick introduction and start some conversation that's a little bit more eye-catching than just the like, hey, like, message. So
yeah,
be creative.
I think love that. That's a great tip. I think the other one that I would say in answer to your question is ask for feedback, and in 2 ways, or at 2 kind of junctures. One is kind of as you're putting together, or if you're refreshing your messaging, your brand, your look and feel in any way. Before you start doing that, ask the people, again, depending on what your brand is about, but it could be former clients. You could do a little survey of consumers. You could ask the people you work with who know you. Just ask them to tell you what they think is different about you. Or, I'm thinking, of course, as a coach, like about you. But if you are selling lipstick, it's like about your product and about your, the vibe of your brand. Because, there's that expression, you can't read the label of the jar that you're in. It's so true. Like, you think the thing that comes easily to you, you're like, well, of course everyone else is doing that. They're not. They're not. And you can't see that that's what's valuable and unique about you to other people, because it's so easy for you. You're like, of course everyone's doing that. So getting that input, first or alongside when you're kind of writing your messaging and thinking about your brand. Super helpful. And then once you've kind of got everything down, right? You've written your elevator pitch, or you've got your pitch deck, or you've got your website. Before you launch anything, go get input. Show it to 20 people. Beta test it.
Yeah, that's not hard to do,
Not.
right?
But we all,
It's like
myself
small,
included, I forget.
small step. Well, the other thing, and this is personal. So I know that I need to, like, I'm at that place, especially at this time of the year, where I'm making a commitment right now here on this podcast episode that I'm going to do this. So if you get an email from me or a call or a text, don't ignore it, because I'm gonna be asking you for feedback, because that's what Susan told me to do. Now, also ask for constructive feedback. I was at an event, and I, was hearing this, and it was specifically in the realm of podcasting, but I was like, dang, yeah, because you always want to hear what's good, right? What do you love about my brand? What do you, and it's great. It makes you feel good. You're like, okay, keep doing this, but you also have to hear maybe what people aren't such a fan of, or sometimes it's the improvement opportunities. Not that it's terrible, but there's a couple ideas that other people have about making it better, or whatever that is. And even though it's harder to hear,
There are a couple of little tricks, like little scripts that you can use. So in the coaching or consulting world, you can do something like, imagine, I haven't done this and I won't, but imagine that I asked you to rate our project on a scale from 1 to 10. And let's say you were generous and gave me an 8, hypothetically. What do you think would have been the 1 or 2 things that could have moved the needle from the 8 to the 10? So you give them all that preamble, you let them save face, you are generous in, like, of course, we both know this was a great relationship. They don't have to say anything else. We love, like, all the love. But can you just give me, like, one thing that, so you're making them give you something negative, but like constructive that you can actually do differently and learn from, while maintaining all the love, right?
all the time.
So there's just little things you can do like that.
This is really funny, and you'll appreciate this having some background in consulting. Okay, so one of the things as a senior leader that I have to think about is this very topic of getting feedback. And at the firm that I work with, we use the Net Promoter Score. So for anybody who's listening that doesn't know what this concept is, it's very simple. A client gets a survey. It's very brief. It's only going to take them about 5 minutes to fill out. It's asking them about their experience with you. And this is in a service-based industry. So if you're a different industry, maybe the questions would be a little different. But the essence of it is to ask them not just about the experience, but the most important question is about if they would recommend you. Okay. Now, in the Net Promoter world, you only want a 9 or a 10. That's all that matters, because a 9 or a 10 is a promoter. An 8 is really just, it's a neutral, right? And it's passive. We call it passive. And anything less than that is what's called a detractor. And so that's really where, if anybody is giving you less, really an 8 or less, you want to, just like you described, know why that is. And you'll, get a variety of answers, but it's important to understand that, because it could be the tiniest nuance. And sometimes it's one experience, one interaction that could make or break the difference between why they did that. And then there's some people you find out, oh, well, I don't ever give anything a 10. Like, why would I do that? That's No, like nothing deserves that. So some people are just
There
hard
is a
graders.
little bit of that.
You
Yeah.
know, by and large, I think people, when asked, do want to be honest. You know, like we've all taken the airline surveys or the hotel surveys, and like, oh yeah, the room wasn't cleaned as good, or the service was like this on the plane, whatever. It's a similar concept. So in that light, that could be something, now that we're sitting here talking about this, that any brand, doesn't matter what you do, whether you're a service or retail, that you could maybe, even if it was like once a year.
The big brands all do this. And the technology is out there that make it cheap and easy for all of us to do it too. Go ask for feedback, create your own net promoter score. Just ask that question. And I wanted to say something about what you mentioned before and what I call moments of delight. What's really interesting, and like this is really the work, a big part of the work that I've been doing with corporations for so many years, like gathering this insight and feedback in multiple ways so that they can learn from their customers. What makes people really happy and satisfied with their experience and therefore likely to give that high net promoter score is largely not, they don't sit back and survey the sort of 5-year relationship they've had with this person or this brand and think equally and balanced proportions about, right? It's like a very emotional thing. And they go, what's amazing about her? There was this one time that I was really struggling, and she went above and beyond and talked to me for an hour free of charge. She totally unlocked the problem I was having. And I, nailed my interview the next day. I'm just making this up. But I've seen it like from health insurance to light bulbs. Like this is a thing. This is a thing. People remember the moment, the above and beyond moment, the delight. And so how can we offer, and that's when I say give more than you get. Those moments of delight are not making you money in the moment. So like forget about that. Sometimes. I mean, I don't mean don't worry about your P&L.
Yeah. Now
But
that would be the conditions if they continue the contract with you, or
that's what I'm saying. Those are the things that build the relationship that then you get the next contract because you were so helpful in that moment.
Mhm. It is. It's about being relationship driven versus transactional oriented. And that's,
That's the
I
word.
think it's difficult, right? Because today it's so easy to do that. Everything is the touch of a button. So being transactional is kind of the nature of the environment we live in. We deal with transactions more rapidly than ever before. You
Yeah.
could do all your banking and do all your everything. You don't ever have, honestly, you don't ever have to leave your home. It's kind of terrifying and interesting at the same time. You could buy your groceries, buy your clothing, buy all your products,
You
just
can
do it
buy
right
a car online now.
in your car, and you could talk to your friends. I mean, it's not like you're disconnected, from the people that you care about. Hopefully you do step out and do other things because it's healthy for you, but that's the world. That's what I mean. That's just the world we live in. So if you want to, this is another topic that I've been connecting with more people on. If you want to build meaningful relationships, you do have to figure out those above and beyond things, because there isn't the hallway conversations anymore if everything is just this type of interaction. You don't have okay, now we're off of the formal, and then we just get to go to walk to grab a coffee before we go on to the next formal thing. But it's in those moments where you learn about someone's parent is sick. They have a child who's struggling. You figure out they're personally struggling. Like, you don't have those moments because everything is just like back to back to back to back, meeting, agenda. And so how do you find those meaningful moments that allow people to know you care above the deal, above the sale, above the money? And that's the finesse, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
So crazy. My gosh. Well, I want to make sure before we wrap up that I ask you a couple questions that get people to know you even better and your perspective, your experience. So, the first question that I want to ask you to pay, light to my brand, Born Unbreakable, is Susan, what makes you unbreakable?
You mean what experiences or what kind of characteristics?
Either, whatever you.
Well, I know it's cliche, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger, but that is so true. It's like, and I think that's why I asked you the question. Like, it's really the experiences that you've been through that are difficult that make you where you learn resilience, where you learn where your breaking point is or isn't, and it's the fact, right? Like we are all resilient and we can handle so much. So I think about, like, in my life, probably the hardest things that I've been through are going through a cancer scare, going through a divorce, breaking up with my business partner, which we were talking about before we went on air. Those kind of big life rifts, right? So there's like a before and an after. And I think collectively that's what the pandemic was for all of us. There's kind of a before time and an after time, like the world has changed, or 9/11 was that collectively. So I think those things where you're like, oh God, I survived that. Okay. I learned a lot from that. I'm a nicer person. I'm a better person. I'm a more grateful person. I also took a look at some of the things that I was doing that precipitated that situation or that didn't make that situation better. I could have done differently in that situation and learned from that. And I think that I have two teenagers at home. So I think about this a lot in terms of, like, there's this huge mental health crisis among teenagers. And as parents, we're supposed to be, we're doing our best to teach them resilience, to teach them to be unbreakable, or to at the very least know that they are unbreakable. And it's very hard because they haven't had those life experiences. And so they're about to bump up against the first time or second time that something's for them. And that's really scary because they can't rely on, like, the answer to your question for me is like, well, I've been through this, this, and this, and this, right?
Yeah.
So the first couple times you do it are not easy. And then I think that I think there are also different qualities that we each bring. Like, some people my husband is just a sunny optimist. He just is. And I don't mean I'm a pessimist, but that's not I don't bring that. What I bring, I'm kind of scrappy. I'm like a survivor. Like, whatever happens, I will figure it out. Like, this gets taken away. Okay, well, I'm going to, like, build a shack over there. Like, and that's a good quality. And, sometimes it gets in my way, but also that's kind of what I bring to any crisis situation. Like, okay, let's figure this out.
I love it.
And we're all different, right? We each but knowing what that thing is that you bring and really, like, owning it and meditating on it and, like, honoring it is so important. And I bet that that's what you do a lot of in your work with people.
Yeah. Own that power and individuality, because it really does separate you from everyone else. What about a self-limiting belief? What is a self-limiting belief you've had to overcome personally?
Oh gosh. I think there's like this that's for other people kind of feeling that I've worked really hard and long. Like the whole mythology that so many people get earlier in their careers, like, don't quit your day job. Well, no one really gets to do that. Or, like, that's a 1 in a million thing. Or, like, that person must have had connections to get that thing or whatever. And I will say now, from lived experiences and watching other people, and myself, I just don't think that's largely true. I mean, of course, some people have extraordinary luck or extraordinary network, but there's lots of people who just go out and do the work and have the spark and make stuff happen.
Mhm.
Most people, what I see is people who really know what they want and keep at it. That's not magic, right? I mean, it's not easy either, because sometimes it takes a while to know exactly what you want, and it certainly takes a lot of effort to keep at it.
Mm.
Not magic, right? And so, like, I get, back to my kids, like when they come to me that I think I might want to do this or that when I grow up, I think, well, why not you? That's the right answer. Not like, oh, well, not that many people get to do that, or like, oh, you'll never make any money doing that. Like, sure, that's a great idea. I think you're going to rock it and be wildly successful at it. Why?
Yeah,
Somebody's doing it. Why not you? And I think we
exactly.
should all be cultivating that. And that took me a very long time to do. And there's
Mm.
still a little evil twin voice in the back of my head. I want to do something like, no one's ever going to publish your book, you know?
Oh, sure. That's like the
Right.
world I'm living in, you know? That's what I'm writing about is my self-limiting belief is unworthiness. It's too big. That's too big for you. That's too much for you. Because it was the game I played was play it safe. Play it safe. Play it safe. Right? But then you start coloring outside the lines and things get crazy and you kind of like it. So, so
Yes,
I
I do
totally,
know.
I can vibe with you on that. Okay. You were mentioning earlier. So I was really curious to ask you this question. Superpower. What is your superpower?
So I use a very specific definition of superpower. There are other definitions of it, but with my clients, I use specifically the definition of like something that doesn't seem like it's all that important necessarily, but that because we all have these, right? Like somebody's great at opening pickle jars. I don't know. Where do they get that superhuman strength? Those kinds of things. Like, what are those like weird random things that you would not put on your resume that you just happen to be extraordinarily good at? Because, first of all, it activates kind of a quirky, creative part of your brain and like a fun conversation. But I tell you what, there is always a thread from whatever those superpowers are into the work that you do or the work that you enjoy or are best at or should be doing. And I'll tell you the two of mine, and they're so random, but and I won't bore you with all the ways that they totally show up in my work, but you can use your imagination. My two are untangling necklaces and parallel parking.
We should hang out.
Do you have a lot of
All the
necklaces?
time. Oh my gosh. I usually am determined to untangle them. I get to a point on occasion where it feels too overwhelming and I have to phone a friend, just like somebody else who wants to take a crack at it because I got it like I think I got it halfway,
I
you
do
know?
know because I am the friend that you phone. Because
Yeah.
people bring me to their homes, or people used to bring me when I worked in an office, they would bring me their necklaces.
Oh no, it's a
You
real
know
thing. I
why
mean,
I'm good at this.
there's probably some innovation that somebody did on Shark Tank that like will help you to not ever have a tangled necklace. There's some device that I haven't purchased yet, so I probably should buy one of those. But it's a real challenge, and that's a real talent. So I just want to acknowledge it as a person who has often tangled items. So that's a really good one. What about something on your bucket list?
Ooh, I have so many things on my bucket list. I don't know where to start. When you first say bucket list, I always think of travel because I basically want to see everywhere. I want to go everywhere. I think I was reading an article about Greenland, which has been on the bucket list for a while. Antarctica's been on the bucket list for a while. I'm obsessed with ice. And Lord knows I may need to see it soon before it disappears. Um,
Oh.
but yeah, I just think ice is so beautiful. And I've made a lot of art about ice and, going to these like rugged, unpeopled places I find so exhilarating. And I've been to a few spots like that are more like in the north of Sweden and Norway. And it's just, I don't know how to explain it. It's just rejuvenating and you feel so connected. And all that stuff that we're talking about here, like how do I be an influencer and how do I, you see it for what it is, right? You like look out at this clear sheet of ice that meets the sky and you're like, oh, that's all just a bunch of like happy noise. And that's fine. We can like enjoy the happy noise, but it's not like the real thing. This is the real thing.
This is the real thing. Oh, I love that. I love that. That's amazing. Susan, if there was one last piece of advice that you could give to anyone listening, what would it be?
My piece of advice is your piece of advice. Be you. Like, own it. Enjoy it. Somebody recently asked me on another podcast, like, oh, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self? And so this is like the piece of advice that I want to give to other people too, right? And my reaction at that time was like, oh, that poor girl. No. I started laughing at myself. The advice is like, everything is going to be okay. Take a breath, right? Like take a breath. Actually, I just found out that Steve Jobs used to say this a lot. You got to trust that all the dots are going to connect. And I was like, oh my God, yes, that's the message. All the dots are going to connect. And I'm talking about zigzag. I want to be over here and over there. And I've got like 50 dots. And then I go, oh, how do they connect? They're going to connect. It may be a life's work, and that's fine. But trust, it's going to be fine. You're going to find your way. Just follow the stuff that you want to do. You're going to figure it out.
That's so comforting. We need that. We need that message right now. Right now. Take that in, listeners. Take it in. Where can people find you? Connect with you?
So if you put embracethezigzag.com into your browser, it will take you to my website, which is Susan Meier Studio, all sorts of resources for coaching and workshops and brand guidelines and all good stuff. There's a couple free downloads on there too, which I encourage you to take advantage of. And I am also really active on Twitter. So you can find me, Susan H. Meier, on Twitter. Say hi and connect with me on LinkedIn. You're going to put all that stuff in the show notes, I'm sure.
I will. It's got to be thorough. It's the age we're living in. He's got lots of links. We got to link up through whichever channel, because that's the other thing about the social media land is everybody kind of gravitates to something that's their favorite. You know, you might be more of the LinkedIn person or the Instagram or the Twitter. So, you know, there's a space for everyone.
Well, I use Instagram because I'm a zigzagger. I have multiple identities online and I love the visual piece of Instagram. So this is all my jewelry. So I put my jewelry and my artwork on Instagram, but I use the Twitter for my coaching business.
I love it. I love it. That's you're living the zigzag.
That'd be me.
You're practicing what you're preaching. You're not just telling people, zig and the zag. You're zigging and zagging too. I dig it. I dig it. This has been so enriching. Something that it's like cathartic because I'm in this place with a brand, thinking about all the time what to do. And I do find that I come back to what you said, and it's when you're you don't have to think that hard about how to do that. So
yes. Yeah. It should be easy when you're in the flow. It just doesn't feel like a struggle, right? Just be yourself and people will love you.
That's right. The end. People. The episode has concluded. And replay that. Just those couple last seconds. Remind yourself. Share it with a friend today. But this has been so amazing. Thank you so much for taking your time to come on the show. I really enjoyed my conversation with Susan, brand strategist, helping women through the zigzags of life to really define that clear brand. And I love that notion of what is the thread through all the things that make you you. And so I am going to land this episode on the message that both Susan and I resonate with together, and that's about being you. That is the best thing that you can do for your brand. So there's two things. If you're a person right now who is, maybe it's not even about that you have a business or anything. You're you, and you work for a company, and this isn't just about the fact that you have to go and start some kind of separate brand. But I will say you are one, whether you acknowledge that or not. Even if you're tuning in as a person that works for a company, you still are a walking brand, because you are you. And there might be working for them and it's you promoting their brand, but I do think that beyond that, it is you showing up as the person who does what you do, enjoys the hobbies and interests that you enjoy, chooses to spend time with the people you choose to spend time with, friends and family. And so that is your belief system. That is what you emanate. That is what you put out there into the world. If you're going right now and you have any kind of social media account, regardless of what kind it is, if you're posting, that's your brand. That is stuff you believe in. Whether it is professional or personal, those are things that represent you. So the more authentic you are with that, the better. So I would just say that as a general point. And for those of you that do have a brand, that you are a business, that you have a product or you have a service, I would encourage you to reconnect with what your why is, what you're doing in the essence and spirit of that why. And if now, or if in upcoming, your next strategy session is to either do one of two things. Get feedback, like what Susan was describing. Figure out how to get feedback from those customers or consumers so you know what things that you may adjust and manipulate to continue bringing the best to your clientele. Or if you're like, I already done that, Des, like I'm on it. You don't need to be telling me what to do. All right, calm down. Don't get crazy. Look at your data. Re-look at your information, look at your data, look at those strategies that you've already developed, and do a gut check if those are still working. Is that bringing the customers, the clients, the volume, the traffic that you want in the door, or is there something that you need to tighten up a little bit more? There's something for everyone in this subject. Whether you believed it or not before you listen to this episode, I hope you do now. We are all walking billboards for the things that we want to emanate in the world, whether it's formal or informal. So just know that. I hope you got a lot out of this episode. Share it with anybody that you think could get some value out of it. Remember that you are your only limit, so take action today. And be sure to tune in as we approach the holidays and just continue to talk about the things that resonate with you and add value to your life. I'd love your feedback. I really, really would. So if there are topics that you want to hear about, or some segment that you want to be added to the show or adjusted on the show, this is a great time for me to get that feedback from you. So I invite you to do that. You can email des@bornunbreakable.com, or you can instant message at bornunbreakable on Instagram and take that in. Well, take in that feedback. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you next time.